Well, people are continuing to join the room. Want to welcome everyone. My name is Ben Bingle, the director of the DeKalb County Nonprofit Partnership. I want to thank you for joining us today for our second webinar in the Philosopher Manager series. A few housekeeping items before we get started. First, just like always, we'll be recording today's webinar, and that recording will be sent to you along with an email. In an email, I should say, and that email will also include an evaluation form for you to provide feedback about today's training. And, of course, if you think there are others in your organization who would benefit from seeing this webinar recording, please feel free to pass it on to them. We do have everyone muted at this time, but we encourage you to use the Q&A and chat features that are built into Zoom, and we'll be saving some time at the end of today's presentation for questions and discussion. We'll plan to have about 50 minutes of content and then around 10 minutes for that discussion period. So with that, today's webinar focuses on mental health, happiness, and well-being, and leading us through that content is Paul Lalonde. Just a little bit about his background. Paul is the Vice President of People and Culture at CETA of Cook County, a community action agency nonprofit organization that helps low-income people throughout Cook County, Illinois. He's also the owner of HR Logic, which is a small consulting business specializing in helping nonprofits solve their HR challenges. Paul's passionate about people and doing the right thing. He draws from a broad range of experiences as a nonprofit professional, public speaker, adjunct professor, and a writer on his blog, The HR Philosopher, with the goal of inspiring others to pursue philosophy as a means to better themselves and their relationships. Welcome back, Paul. We appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Ben. I'm glad to be back, and sorry about all the technical hiccups, but thus is our world today, and I think it's timely for the topic we're about to discuss. So just checking in with you that my screen, everybody can see it, and we're good to go. So with that, the next part of our discussion is around well-being and happiness. So just like the last time that we discussed philosophy, we asked questions, right? So before we were asking how to be a leader, what does it mean to be a leader? How do you be true to yourself? What is true? What do you believe to be true, et cetera, et cetera. So the next questions we really need to be asking and thinking about is, what is happiness? How does it relate to wellness? How can I live in a manner to enhance my happiness and my own well-being? Now, just like last time, the mistake is asking these questions only in our personal lives. You should be asking these questions in your work life too. And really, there isn't a dichotomy between the two of them. If your philosophy is to exist in your personal endeavors, philosophy must also exist in the boardroom. It has to exist on the assembly line and the welcome counter. And you have to be a person of action when you think about philosophy and all these things. So it's not just thinking about them, it's putting them into action. So topics for today, we're gonna just quickly recap last time. We're gonna talk about the dichotomy of control, kind of go into a little bit of definitions of happiness, talk about self-care. We're going to talk about meditation and both Eastern and Western types of meditation. Briefly talk about resiliency, which is a key skill that lots of managers today need in this world. And real quickly, the concept of being water. What does that mean? And then comments and questions at the end. So real quick, just a quick recap. Again, philosophy is the inquiry into understanding of reality, knowledge, and how a person should live. Philosophy is not just theory, it is action. So we talked about the 4 virtues. All virtues flow from these 4, which is wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. So the idea of the philosopher manager comes from Plato's Republic. And in the Republic, he had the allegory of the cave, where pretty much, long story short, he says philosophers make the best kings. And the reasoning behind that is, they study truth above all else. They see the world accurately. They sufficiently deny themselves, and then they're free of lust and greed. So Plato had a really high, I think, opinion of philosophers. So if you take all these ideas that he had and apply them as you're a manager, how you lead other people and how you lead yourself, that creates, in my idea, an ideal type kind of leader and manager, which to me is the philosopher manager. So as we're talking today about happiness, I always start with this quote in my own personal lives. But happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within your control and some things are not. So we're going to explore this. And for background, Epictetus was a Stoic philosopher in ancient Rome. So has anybody, hopefully everybody, maybe not, has heard of the Serenity Prayer? You know, when you think of serenity, it is a state of being calm, peaceful, untroubled. You know, think about the Buddhist monk who is in a temple away from the world. You know, it's beautiful, right? But that's unrealistic. You're a professional. You can't just pack up and move to the mountains and stop doing what you're doing. So you have to figure out a way, how do I be serene in the world that is around me? You have a job, you have family, kids, a career, friends, maybe enemies, hopefully not, but let's be realistic. Not everyone likes us. So the important jobs are trying to make sure the world is a better place through your mission of your nonprofit work. So with the Serenity Prayer, it was first written by Reinhold Niebuhr, who was an American theologian, and it's used very heavily in the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program. So it begins with, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? So simply put, the dichotomy of control is some things are in our control and other things are not. So what's not in your control, it doesn't mean you don't pay attention to it or you don't give up, you give up on it, right? You're pretty much coming to the understanding that these things are not within my control. It's the outcome. The outcome's not my control, but working up to that, it is. So this is called preferred indifference, right? Is it better to be rich than poor? Yes, it is better to be healthy than it is to be sick. But those things aren't really within my control. We don't let it affect how we feel. We work to reach our goals, but our joy comes from the process, not the outcome. So caring about what you cannot control is much more difficult than just saying, you know, don't worry about what you can't control, right? So here's some thoughts into what you can control, what you can't. And then in the middle is sort of this, you have an influence over, but ultimately it doesn't really control. You don't really have any say in the ultimate outcome. So what do you have full control over? Your thoughts, your words, your actions, behaviors, how you react. You control your decisions and your choices. You control your attitude, your mindset, your mood, and your work ethic. What you have zero control over, what any of us do, is the weather, whether we're at peace, whether we're at war, ultimately government policies, who wins elections, actually who's even running in elections, you don't have any control over. The traffic, all these type of things. So again, in control is opinions, aspirations, desires. Not in your control is pretty much everything else. And then in the middle, it's interesting, you know, these things that you have some influence over, other people's actions. You know, if you're a boss, you can't necessarily control if your stalker is putting the things away in the right place. You can direct it and have some influence over it, but again, you have no control over the result. It's coming to understand that and accept that. So when we take the dichotomy of control and take it to the next step, well, how does that affect my happiness? I always look at happiness in the ancient context versus the modern context. The modern context for happiness, I think, is often confused with, you know, feeling good, pleasure. It's I'm doing this thing and it brings me happiness. While the ancient, especially in the Greco-Roman world, happiness in their mind was a flourishing life. It's well-being. To flourish meant to practice virtue in a lot of ways. We maximize our potential in worthy pursuits, right? So you focus on your actions and what you can control, like being a better person than you were yesterday, and work towards that end. When you do that, you're flourishing, and the mere act of living virtuously brings happiness. So I think that's a really interesting and necessary concept to think about this. And the word eudaimonia, it's, in ancient Greek, it's the ultimate goal of a life of all philosophies mostly agreed on. Pretty much means the first part, you, means being on good terms. And then Damien, which is within yourself. So it's being on good terms within yourself. Often gets translated as the supreme happiness. There's this idea of the Epicurean happiness, which is, kind of hedonism. But in the ancient context, hedonism means just pleasure at the end of the day brings happiness. The Stoics sort of, I think, fought that in a lot of ways. To them, acting virtuously at the end of the day brings the ultimate happiness. And then I always kind of think about the Buddhist happiness. And the Buddhist happiness is achieved when a person can perceive the true nature of reality. So I kind of put all these up here just to give you some ideas and thoughts on which way you kind of lead at the end of the day. I throw this up here again. I think philosophy is presenting information and letting other people rationalize through it. I have my own opinions and thoughts on it, but everyone else may think differently. So that's why I throw all these different things up here. So we think about the dichotomy of control and happiness, and then think about what does this mean in the modern context. Right now, there is a mental health crisis in the age of COVID, and really it really started before COVID. But approximately 1 in 5 adults in the US experiences a mental illness in a given year. 1 in 25 adults experiences serious mental illness in a given year that interferes with their ability to function on a daily basis. Approximately 1 in 5 youth between the ages of 13 and 18 experience severe mental illness. And even children have experienced mental challenges over the past year. Almost 7% of US adults had at least one major depressive episode in the past year. And almost 20% of US experience anxiety in some sort of a way. Then finally, 20 million adults in the US experience substance abuse disorder, which is heavily related to mental health challenges. So the consequences of these situations, it costs America almost $200 billion in lost earnings. So that's when somebody can't go to work because of these situations. How are they providing for their family, which sort of exacerbates the issue? Mood disorders, including major depression, bipolar disorder, are the third most common cause of hospitalizations in the US. So think about that, especially in the world of COVID, when hospital beds are filled up, how many people are not able to seek mental health and those type of conditions at that time. It just creates a backlog, which again exacerbates the issue. Individuals living with serious mental illness face increased risk of chronic mental conditions. So oftentimes mental illness is accompanied by other physical illnesses as well. Unfortunately, suicide has been rising as a leading cause of death in a lot of areas of the US. And it's especially alarming that's the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34. And more than 90% of people who die by suicide show symptoms of mental health conditions. And then we, of course, are veterans, which is a huge challenge for a lot of us. So when you put all this together, it can't help but beg the question, why is the world seemingly so unhappy, especially the modern world? And that brings me to Bertrand Russell, who wrote The Conquest of Happiness. He was a British philosopher who adhered to what is now known as analytic philosophy. It's kind of hard to define exactly what that means, but long story short, it focused on taking things kind of piecemeal in what he called an attempt to focus philosophical reflection on smaller problems that lead to answers to bigger questions. So Russell in particular saw logic and science as foundational principal tools for philosophy. He didn't just say, oh, we need to think on this abstract higher level. No, he said, you look at the situation and then you apply logic to it. That's philosophy to Bertrand Russell. So in 1930, he published The Consequence of Happiness, and it examined why society seems to be so miserable. Even though it was published almost 90 years ago, it still sounds remarkably contemporary to today. So the first cause of unhappiness to Bertrand Russell was meaninglessness. It's sort of this pessimistic existentialism, nihilism in a lot of ways, where nothing is meaningful. Nothing has any inherent meaning. And to Russell, this missed the point. An example is that you're going to die and turn into nothingness. Well, look at the bright side, he would say. If you lived forever, the joys of life would inevitably end and lose their savor, as he said. Life is only meaningful because we eventually die. So to him, meaninglessness is a cause of unhappiness, unnecessarily so. The next to him was competition. And we're not talking about sports or healthy competition like in free market business and those type of things. No, Russell means what he called the struggle for life. So it's a bleak survival of the fittest view of everything. You know, Russell believed we should stop taking ourselves and everything around us so seriously. Remember what is truly life and death most of the time is really just life. So don't take everything around you so seriously. Boredom. You know, ever since we stopped chasing down woolly mammoths for dinner or looking out for saber-toothed cats in the bushes, you know, life has become increasingly more boring, right? We've traded adventure for stability, and there's nothing wrong with that. And this helped advance and produce great advances for humanity. But think, we work less than ever before. And the human mind was not made to not do anything. So what are we doing to fill that time? Boredom isn't necessarily bad, but for Russell, boredom becomes dangerous when we treat it as something to avoid at all costs and go the great lengths to stay in an unhealthy state of excitement. So to him, it was the fear of boredom. So to him, it really was try and find that balance. You know, don't be running yourself ragged to fear boredom, but don't just sit there and be bored for absolutely no reason all the time. You got to have that healthy balance. Fatigue, to him, this wasn't a physical fatigue. This was a mental fatigue. You know, think about all the things you have to do on a daily basis. We rush to bed late. We get up early, rush to get ready, rush to get the kids ready, rush to take them to school, rush to sit in traffic on a commute. Then we get to work, stare at a screen all day. Then we rush to sit in traffic on the way home, rush the kids to practice, all these type of things, school board meetings, working on presentations late at night for DCMP, and then go to bed, start over again the next day. You know, humans weren't built to do this. You know, most moderns leave a nerve-wracking life and are continually too tired to be capable of enjoyment without the help of alcohol. Russell wrote that, I think somewhat glibly, but his solution, stop caring as much. If you've seen the movie Office Space, a lot of it can kind of be found, at least philosophically, in that movie, to a point. Envy, you know, thou shalt not covet. You know, most, especially when we live in this Instagram society, especially, you know, hot girl summer, all those type of things, where we're looking at what everybody else is doing. The best thing to do is not fall for that. You know, people are posting on social media their best lives, but you have to remember that they are going through a lot of challenges too, and people don't want to post that necessarily online. So keeping up with the Joneses, remember that the Joneses are no different from you or me. People post their best items on social media, but most aren't posting about their depression, their horrible kids, how horrible their kids are doing at school, their divorces, all these things. Try and put in perspective that they're just like you and me, and don't envy what they have. Grass isn't always greener on the other side. Guilt and shame, and this for Russell was linked to, Puritan society in a lot of ways. He was very countercultural for his time, where he said people focus too much on little things like swearing, smoking, sex outside of marriage, those type of things, when the real moral dangers to him were shady business practices, how we mistreat and are cruel to one another, and political conflicts. Russell had a strong moral code, and he wasn't afraid to express this. Like once he sent a telegram to JFK during the Cuban Missile Crisis telling him, you're stop doing what you're doing or you're going to get us all killed, kind of a thing. Those are the type of things that he thought that we should worry about, not be guilted and shamed into the ancient or the long-term puritanical type kind of stuff. Persecution mania. This is, in his words, self-absorption and big egos. So people who post articles and they rant, they do things to try and go viral and then lament that no one cares about them, right? We all probably know someone sometime, and maybe even ourselves, people aren't thanking me enough. People are gossiping about me. How dare them? People don't realize how selflessly I'm acting to help them. They don't appreciate me. He said that people, when they go down this area, succumb to their ego, which creates unhappiness. His advice, as usual, is to get over yourself. You're not as good as you think you are. And I kind of always made me think of this quote by Epictetus again, who said, a friend said, hey, this guy criticized you. What do you think about that? And Epictetus, the philosopher, said, well, if that person really knew me and my flaws, they'd have said a heck of a lot much worse than they just said. So they said that sort of as a joke, but don't take what other people say as seriously. And finally, fear of public opinion. I think it's a very real human emotion to not feel as they belong. When you fear public opinion, you fear that you're not belonging to something. Evolutionarily, we need to have a bond with others for our own survival. That's still the case today, but the stakes are a lot lower and they're different. People are more aware of and hyper-focused on the differences between one another. For Russell, these differences within the larger context of society were a source of possible judgment, isolation, keeping people apart. You may not feel like you fit in if you don't go to church. You may not feel like you fit in if you don't have the right books, you don't have the right look, you don't have the right clothes, all those type of things. Russell's advice in this case, and especially the young people, was just find your tribe, find your community, find where you do fit in. Choose a career with like-minded folks, choose friends that help lift you up, even if it goes against what your parents have to say at the end of the day. So with all of that in the modern context, it made me think of this quote. People have a hard time letting go of their suffering. Out of fear of the unknown, they prefer suffering that is familiar. So I think it's really in human nature to avoid what makes us uncomfortable. And a lot of that is sometimes finding happiness. It's uncomfortable to try and find happiness, so we prefer to stay unhappy. But to get to happiness, you have to go through discomfort. Mark Perry, who's the executive director in community action agencies in Wisconsin, there is no movement without friction. Friction's hard, it creates heat. Heat is uncomfortable, but without friction, we can't really move forward and there's nothing worth doing. It brings me to this comfort zone wheel, right? So those who are fearful and those who are unhappy are oftentimes, you may not think of it in these terms, but they're more comfortable. They're comfortable in their unhappiness. They feel safe in it because they know it. They understand it. They don't understand what it feels like to be well, what it means to be happy. So the fear zone keeps them from moving forward. But if you can make it through the fear zone to get to the learning zone, you start making progress and eventually more towards happiness, well-being, and feeling better self-sufficiently. Which leads me to the next idea. Happiness is a choice. Dogen was a Japanese Zen philosopher and Buddhist. He wrote, if you cannot find the truth exactly where you are, where do you expect to find it? I took that and think by asking the same question, but twisting it a bit. If you are not happy here and now, where do you expect to find it? To me, and to a lot of science that backs up, and scientific studies show this in a lot of ways, that happiness is a choice. You know, outside of legitimate neurological conditions, I want to make that clear, you know, like depression, anxiety, where there's physical, neurological stuff in the brain and biology. Outside of that, happiness is a choice for the vast majority of people. That's a picture of Dr. Viktor Frankl. He's the best-selling author of Man's Search for Meaning. And he was a survivor of the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. So while he was in Nazi concentration camps, he kind of observed his fellow inmates, and he observed that all things could be taken from a man except the final freedom, in what he called the ability to choose how we will respond in any situation. He wrote that between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And then I would add our happiness. So that brings us back to Russell. In his Conquest for Happiness, he examined how society can be happy. So how can they choose to be happy? His first is what he called zest. So think of cooking, right? Orange zest, it adds flavor, it's seasoning. So season your life, flavor your life with things that you enjoy. Be interested in new experiences. Take notice of the people around you. Experiment with new hobbies, be curious, just try things, you know. If you like watching sports, watch sports. If you want to read, go read. If you want to play chess, then be a chess master. To him, that was zest, which adds to life. Another way of happiness from Bertrand Russell is affection. So he believed to be truly happy, we have to freely give and receive affection. Now, the problem comes in because people hold themselves back. Similarly, if anyone's familiar with Brené Brown, she calls this vulnerability armor. We need vulnerability to truly open up and trust and love one another, but we put on armor to block that. So we have to systemically remove that armor so that we can expose our vulnerability and true affection. And if you had the chance, try and read Brené Brown's book, Dare to Lead. It's paradigm shifting in a lot of ways. The third is family. So it begins with the idea that family life is challenging, right? It's expensive, noisy, stressful. Kids keep you up all night. All these type of things. People are yelling about politics at Thanksgiving dinner. All these type of things. Still, Russell considers happiness of parenthood the greatest of any that he had ever experienced. And he took it even further and said, it's not just parents, it's not extended, immediate family. It's family is defined as a profound connection to others and contributing to the next generation. So that can be friends, that can be coworkers, that can be all those type of things that help you maintain a profound experience can be thought of as family. You need to feel connected to one another. It's a deep-seated human need. Work. Think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We need food, water, shelter. That's the basics. But beyond that, Russell advised that in order to be happy, humans do need work, but they need to have meaning in their work. They need to have purpose, a higher calling. Human beings need action, movement. They need to figure things out. So we need to use these tools, whether that's a hammer, whether it's our math skills, whether it's our reading skills, to find meaning in work and happiness at the end of the day. perspective. So this one's one of my favorite ones. Next time you're fretting or anxious, or your mind just can't let go of some slight that somebody did to you, remember what Russell said. It's very easy to become so absorbed in our own pursuits, our own circle, our own type of work that we forget how small a part this is in the total human activity and how many things in the world are entirely unaffected by what we do. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, put it another way: to bear in mind constantly that all of this has happened before and it will happen again, the same plot from beginning to end, the identical staging. We're all just space dust floating amongst other space dust, aimlessly drifting in a void of nothingness. This isn't to disparage or challenge people's woes. I mean, real feelings of sadness and all those things need to be taken seriously and thought of, but maybe this isn't so bad and it's not as big of a deal as I thought it was before. It's not unprecedented. As Marcus Aurelius said, everything that's ever happened has already happened before. Just figure out what happened to them and how it can help you now. I mentioned this earlier: balance, everything in moderation. Russell says you have to know when to put in effort, when you need to back off. That balance is effort and resignation to him. So know what you can control, know what you cannot control, and focus on what you can do to make whatever is better within your life right now. Focus on that stillness and rest when you need to, and then amp it up if you need to. Then finally, radiance. This one is somewhat more poetic, but you can tell when someone is happy. You can just tell when you look at someone, you go, that's a happy person. When I look at like Steve Harvey, for example, that is a happy man. They just glow, they radiate. There's something different about them. So if you can figure out a way to do this, you in chance give your light to other people. If you do this for others, then they will also be happiness. And it reminded me of a Buddhist saying where it was 1,000 candles can be lit from the light of one candle. So think of that in your radiance as you're choosing on how you want to be happy. And with all that, that was a lot of heavy stuff. I want to take a quick step back and do our first poll. So with that, after hearing all about Russell's keys to happiness, which one most resonates with you? Okay, and the results came in. Family and radiance are tied for one, and then perspective. Nice. With these type of things, there's no right, there's no wrong. And I think that's somewhat of the beauty of finding our own philosophy and ways through life. So thank you everybody for taking a moment to think that through and bring that in. So when you're choosing to be happy, if happiness is within our reach and our abilities, we have to actively choose to take that path. In a lot of ways, how do you get from being unhappy and unwell to well and happy? That's through self-care. And self-care is not selfish. The only person that can bring you happiness is you. Nothing external will bring happiness. That all comes from within. So that is where self-care comes in and trying to find that out. Much like, the airline attendants, they instruct you to put your mask on first so that you can assist others with their masks. If you don't take care of yourself, how do you expect to take care of other people? It's important to take care of yourself so that you can show up and be the best self that you can be for your coworkers, for the organization that you help lead, for your clients and your agencies. If you're not well, you can't be expected to help others to be well. So these are some of, how do I know if I need help? How do I know if I need to begin work at helping myself become more happy? These are the burnout signs. These are non-well-being signs. You just do a Google search and these things will pop up. A lot of them are physical ailments, and some of them are mental ailments. And there's a clear connection between the mind and the body. That's been proven by science, where if the mind is not doing well, the body begins to suffer and break down. If the mind is doing great, so long as the body, physically isn't ailing and those type of things like that are outside of its control, like old age or cancer, those type of things, the body continues to do well as the mind does well. Yep. So non-well-being, how does this affect you at work or others at work? 60% of people who aren't feeling well have started looking for new jobs, whether that's stress related or whatever it is. 59% of people can't sleep. If you're unable to sleep well, how do you expect to come in and do a great job at work? 53% like, I'm done. I'm just showing up for the paycheck, checking out. 46% take unplanned time off, so absenteeism goes up. If you have higher absenteeism, how are you going to serve your clients? Those type of things. 43% have taken it out on friends and family, which is an unfortunate, I think, human reaction at times. We don't know how to deal with it ourselves, so we take it out on someone else, which only exasperates it again. And then again, people who lose their tempers at work. So I wanted to give some, none of this is radical, none of this is new, and you probably hear it in any self-help, self-wellness article, but I think it bears repeating. What are some practices? What should you be doing to take care of yourself and help you on a path to choosing to be happy and choosing to be well? One, take care of your body, exercise, eat well, sleep. Those are things we all know. Don't pick up the burger, pick up the salad. You're like, I don't like the salad. Well, find a way to make the salad sexy so you want to eat it, There are ways to figuring it out. Talking with others, not just with professionals, the EAP and those type of things, but find your loved ones who you can talk to and connect with. If not your family or coworkers necessarily, other professionals. I mean, that's what the DCMP is there for. If you're an executive director, call another executive director. Go, man, what are you doing? How are you feeling? What's going on? I'm going through this. Are you going through that too? You find out you're not alone. And you kind of form these self-help groups just in tandem, This one is incredibly important. Watch what you consume, and not just food. Watch what you watch and watch whom you hang out with. You might think that hanging out with this person, we've been friends forever and all these things, but if they're a toxic personality, you have to set up some boundaries, because you are, or you become, who you hang out with the most. So trying to figure out how you can hang out with people that help rise you up and help you through these things. Then if you're watching, garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. Now that doesn't mean, I'm going to watch a little bit of Hell's Kitchen just to relax and all that. That, in moderation, there's nothing wrong with that. But if all you watch or all we watch is just unstimulating things, it does have a negative effect on the body and the mind. Mindfulness and gratitude. And there's more to it than just, mindfulness has been this buzzword forever, but, it's thinking about there is no past. It doesn't exist. There is no future. It doesn't exist. The only thing that we can focus on and the only thing we have any influence over is right here and right now. That's mindfulness. It's that understanding. And gratitude, studies have shown that just being grateful raises happiness in every which way. So it's flipping your mind, in your mind, the way that the mind operates. So it's raining outside. Oh, geez, this sucks. I hate rain. To flipping it to going, hey, we're in a drought. We need the rain. I'm grateful that it's raining. So that's just one very, very tiny example. And there's a Stoic exercise that actually takes that gratitude to the extreme. And it's called amor fati, which is Latin for love your fate. It's not just accepting everything that happens to you, it's taking it to the extreme and loving everything that happens to you. So an example would be, I just got in a car crash. Oh my God, I hate this. This is awful. No, it's going, I'm glad I got in a car crash because it's going to teach me X, Y, Z. You might be like, geez, that's extreme. It is. And that's kind of the point of it in a lot of ways. So the last thing too is meditation. And I'm going to go into that. So this brings us to our next poll. So have you ever practiced the art of meditation before? Yeah, I find it a wonderfully and healing. Yes, but I'm unsure what the big deal is all about. No, I just never really gave it much thought. Or no, what am I, a hippie? So submitting, a few more seconds as answers roll in. Wow, okay. Tied. Yes, I find it wonderful and healing. And no, I never really gave it much thought. Both are 44%. And then another 11% said, yeah, I tried it, but I'm not really sure what the big deal is about. And there's no right and no wrong with any of this. Again, we're finding our own ways. So when I say meditation, at least for right now, I'm talking the concept of Eastern meditation. So this is a concept I kind of talked about a little bit earlier, where the heart, the mind, and the body are like pools of water. They're all connected. Life gets messy and muddy and murky. Meditation quiets that life so that the pools of water can become still, thus allowing everything to settle, and then you can become clear and understand it. That's the idea behind meditation. It's about stillness. You might have heard Zen before. Zen is a Japanese Buddhist offshoot or whatever. Can't think of the right word right now, but it literally means in Japanese meditation. And it's an emphasis on the relationship of one's true self that comes with personal experience of meditation. Don't rely on others' teachings. You learn by doing. So there are a lot of benefits to meditation. Uh, as far as as far as Westerners have come to think of it, scientific studies have shown that meditation, when practiced frequently, has actually changes the way the brain functions. It rewires the brain and makes new neurological connections and replaces old parts of it. That's been shown. It's shown that it trains the brain to be more mindful. When you sit in meditation, you're literally trying to just focus on right here, right now. You're focusing on your breath, for example, and that's all you want. My thoughts will pop into your head, but you don't ignore the thoughts. You say, okay, the thought came in, then you gently nudge it aside, say, thank you for coming. I need to focus on my breath. The more you do that, the more you bring that with you into the real, not the real world, but into your day-to-day life, and you become much more mindful just out of habit in your day-to-day activities outside of meditation. Meditation has been shown to overcome anxiety because it helps people connect and remain in the moment. Anxiety comes about because we are fretting over the past or fearing the future. Again, mindfulness is about saying there is no past, there is no future, there's only now. Meditation is shown to promote relaxation, calmness, good sleep, focus, and it helps with breathing. So if you're like, okay, maybe I need to give this some second thought, there's some tips to begin your practice if you want. Create a space that's your space to go to. Find your posture. There's no right or wrong. The Western way of thinking, oh, that's the person sitting under a tree, cross-legged, palms on their knees, and going, oh, whatever. That is a way you could do it if you want. There are other ways. You could lay down. You could do sitting meditation. There's walking meditation, where you're literally just focusing on how you're walking. You're sitting on the couch, laying, all those type of things. There's no wrong way to become mindful and meditate. So find your own posture. Breathe deeply, focus on the breath, because when you breathe in, it's getting all that oxygen, which is necessary for your body to heal and function properly. Another thought is let go of thoughts. That doesn't mean put up blockers and say, I don't want to think. It's not about thinking. The human mind was made to think. Meditation is not make people stop thinking. It helps you slow the thinking down. Let the water and the silt flow through so that you can open up your mind more. As a thought comes up, look at it, wave hello, wave goodbye, and move on with your breath. Then finally, close your meditation practice. Make sure you have a clear beginning and a clear ending. With that, I wanted to just quickly, because I know we started a little late and we're running up close on time, but Stoic meditation, this is journaling. This is like more of a Western style kind of thinking of meditation. In Stoicism, we have a tool to help pursue self-mastery, wisdom, perseverance. All these things can be found in journaling. All the Stoics did it in some form or another. Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, his book, Meditations, was actually his journal, his private journal. He never meant for anybody to ever see those thoughts, but his wisdom somehow survived after his death and has stayed with us for 2,000 years ever since. So if it's good for a Roman emperor to do, it was good for me, I would think. Journaling helps you learn from your mistakes. The goal isn't to beat yourself up. It's not, oh man, I messed up today. No, hey, I messed up today. I'm going to own it and I'm going to do better tomorrow. That's the whole point of it. What went wrong and how do you move forward? There's some things that you can ask yourself. Again, what went wrong? What did I do right today? What is left undone? Some other prompts that you can maybe ask yourself is, if I'm going through an issue, is this in my control? Write out why it is or why it isn't. Am I missing out by choosing to worry and be afraid? Am I doing my job? Is this who I want to be as a person? There's any number of these things. Even journaling, I journal just quotes that I like, and I post them to my LinkedIn just to share with people and all that. And I find that very relaxing and helps with my well-being. So there is no right or wrong way to journal as well. These are just some ideas and thoughts that you can take with you. Then finally, the number one skill of future managers, employers is resiliency. Psychological resilience doesn't come from positive feelings. It comes from leveraging your negative feelings and then flipping it on its head. Resiliency is the ability to create positive adaptations to negative events. So how do you build it up? First, care about something bigger than yourself. Focus on what you can control. That if you take anything away from today, think about what you can and can't control. Prepare for the worst, which is the Latin phrase premeditatio malorum. It's think about what could go wrong, and then make sure that you have plan A, plan B, and plan C just in case, so nothing can surprise you. Face your inner masochist. Hold yourself accountable. Face your ego. Shut it down when necessary, and be honest with yourself. And finally, never suffer alone. Again, it goes back to the idea of call your fellow executive directors. What are you going through? What's happening? How can we get through this together? And I want to leave you with this thought. It's one of my favorite quotes by Bruce Lee when he was talking about what it means to be water. He had said, in order to control myself, I first must accept myself by going with and not against my nature. That's water, right? Water is fluid. It's soft, it's yielding, but water will wear away a rock. which is rigid and can't yield, right? As a rule, whatever is fluid, soft, and yielding can overcome what is rigid and hard. This is another paradox, what is soft is strong. And that's from Lao Tzu, which is an Eastern philosopher. So being water is about letting go of control and accepting what is, but ensuring you can act in areas to make significant changes necessary. As the world of work, is ever changing, and workplaces and our lives are more complex than our minds can even comprehend, a helpful approach to work life is one that's flexible and adaptable. Once that enables us to flow along, you can flow like water. So depending on its environmental constructs, water changes. When it's cold, water becomes ice because it needs to fit that situation. When it's hot, it evaporates and becomes steam. It fills the need of that situation. And like Bruce Lee says, when it's in a glass, it becomes the glass. Water doesn't resist, it just keeps being water regardless of what comes its way. So as Bruce Lee said, empty your cup so that it can be filled. And I like what Yoda said, which is the same thing. When Luke said, I can't lift the X-Wing out of there, it's different than lifting a rock. Yoda's like, no different, only different in your mind. You must unlearn what you have learned. This is the power of water, and that is the power of resiliency, which helps lead to better wellness and better happiness. So just like the last time, all the sources and readings, the list is getting bigger. But with all of that, we come back to the Agora. If we did have a little bit of time for any Q&A that you all may have.
Thanks, Paul. We've had 3 questions come in, and it'd be great to be able to touch on each of these. So keeping in mind that Paul may not be able to elaborate as much as he normally would, so that we're mindful of time. But the first one says, as a type A personality, the notion of giving up control is difficult for me. Can you comment on how, quote unquote, control freaks can shift toward a different mindset?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and it's a challenge that that I would encourage all type A personalities to explore, because they'll figure it out on their own. At the end of the day, just refocus back on the dichotomy of control. Can you control this? Again, there are only a handful of things that you really can control. I think what people lose sight of is, well, if I don't get it done, then it's not going to get done right or whatever. It's detaching yourself from the outcome and focusing on the process at the end of the day. But I would relook at and really try and meditate on and think about, and what I mean by meditate, but think about, what can I truly control? And if I cannot control this, how do I work myself through it to where I can detach myself from that? And that will take a long for some, not so long for others, to work through that on that level. But I do appreciate that question quite a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thank you for the question. Next, as executive director of a small nonprofit, what can I offer employees and volunteers to make sure they feel supported from a mental health perspective?
I know my number one is always going to the EAP, but I know that's not always realistic because of budget and all those type of things. I would create, as best you can, what's called a psychologically safe work environment. Psychologically safe is where people feel safe to speak up without repercussion. They feel safe that if they fail, they're not going to get reprimanded unless they keep failing over and over again. You have some limits, but in the same area is what I mean. But create those types of environments to say, hey, look, we may not have the resources to go to EAP and all that, but I'm supporting you in your journey as you can. So whether that's giving literally mental health days, if you can, I would do that and name it as such, because wording matters in a lot of ways. So that's what I would try to focus on.
Final question, work-life balance can be difficult to achieve. Are you aware of any recent trends of what nonprofit organizations are doing to make that balance more achievable?
Again, I think this is related again to the psychological safe environment and what kind of a culture do you want at your organization. At the end of the day, remember, just like you are responsible for your own happiness, your employees and your volunteers, they are responsible for their own happiness too. So I would try leading the horse to water, but then accepting that they may not drink. So the process is leading them to water. So you're creating the environment, but hoping that it will drink. And again, detaching yourself from that final outcome. It's creating that environment where you also model the behavior, go, you know what, I'm the executive director. I'm letting you all know I'm being a little bit vulnerable. I'm just going through some things. I'm taking a mental health day. I'm unplugging 100%. If you do that, what do you think all your other employees will feel very empowered that they can also do that? I think completely figuring out a way to model that behavior can be helpful too. But again, you have to be able to do it. Or at minimum, if you literally can't, encourage your staff to and try and hold them to that and go, hey, you're off today. Why are you checking your email? So.
Great. Well, thank you again for those questions, those of you attending, and thank you to Paul for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Such great content. And if additional questions come up, Paul is so generous with his time. He's got his contact information there. You can feel free to reach out to him directly, and I suspect he will get back to you. So as we mentioned earlier, a follow-up evaluation is going to be sent by email along with today's recording. We've also got the slide deck that we'll share with you. We do encourage you, as always, to visit dcmp.org. Follow us on Facebook for upcoming trainings and opportunities. The third and final webinar in this series is going to be hosted on November 10th, and it focuses on communication. And I have just so enjoyed the first two sessions, and I'm really looking forward to part 3. So we hope you are too, and that you'll join us for that workshop. Again, you can register for that by visiting dcmp.org. Once more, thank you for attending, and a big thank you goes to Paul Lalonde for sharing his time and expertise with all of us today. Thanks a lot, and take care.